Hey guys, welcome back to my small engine repair channel. Today I'm going to show you what to look for when you're buying a used chainsaw, and I'm also going to tell you when it's time to walk away from a deal. Now, I always tell my customers that are looking for a chainsaw, if you have the budget to buy a brand new one, buy it brand new because you're not buying other people's problems that way, and you will have some warranty. Unfortunately, not everybody has the budget to buy a new chainsaw, so I want to make sure you guys go prepared when you go and look at a used chainsaw. So the very first thing I tell people to check when they go look for a chainsaw is the compression. You can grab the chainsaw and pull it. If the compression feels good, that's a good sign. However, even if it does feel good, there could be some underlying problems that will be very serious, even though you do feel good compression. So you've probably seen in some of my videos, I've had chainsaws that did start and they did run for a bit, even though they were all scored up on the piston and cylinder. The first thing you want to do, if the seller will allow you, is to remove the muffler on a chainsaw and check the condition of the piston and rings. So typically you'd want your piston and rings to look nice and shiny like this without any scratches. And this is what you do not want to see. If you see this on a chainsaw, scored piston and rings and a cylinder, walk away immediately. That's a huge, huge red flag. This will cause you problems. That means the saw got hot, they didn't mix the fuel properly, or who knows what else. Now the saw might run not bad when it's cold with a scored piston and cylinder if it even starts, but usually when it warms up it will not run at all, or it will run really, really bad. So if the seller will allow you to remove the muffler, again, have a look inside. This saw here, I made a video on it in my shorts videos. The link is in the top right hand corner of your screen right now if you want to watch it. My customer went to buy this saw. It's relatively new. It's in good cosmetic condition. It did start, however, it wouldn't rev up. And the cause of this is a scored piston and rings. And you can see inside the cylinder here how the piston and rings are all scored up. So I'll spin it over so you see it better. This is what you absolutely do not want to see. Unless you're buying a saw for parts, just walk away immediately. Because at this point, when you see this kind of damage, it's going to cost more to fix it than what the saw is worth. And this saw here too is easy to pull over with the spark plug on. So right there, that's a sign you shouldn't touch a saw or buy it if it's in this condition. Now, one thing I've noticed when people buy used saws, almost immediately I can tell it needs a new bar and chain. Here in Canada, you're looking at almost $100, sometimes more, to replace the bar and chain depending on your saw. So if you think you're going to buy a saw and not have to spend money on it, most of the time you're going to have to do something with the bar and chain right off the bat. So think about an extra $100 in repairs right away if the bar is not good. So what you want to do is look for a lot of wear and tear on the bar. This saw here, the bar doesn't look too bad, but at closer inspection, you can see that the groove inside the bar here is a lot larger than it should be. So it's basically a safety issue. The chain may come off the bar a lot easier than it should. And there's also going to be a lot of play like this on the chain. So it's going to make it a lot harder to cut through the wood and also to cut straight. And here are more signs of a worn out bar. You can see it's spreading at the end. So those are things you can check quickly without being too invasive on the saw you're buying. Sometimes the sellers will get uncomfortable if you start taking apart their saw to check it out. Now, one really important thing you want to do, obviously, is test run the chainsaw. That way you can tell how it runs when it's warm or through wood. If there's a log there and you can test the saw, that's even better. And also, a very critical thing to check, if you start up the saw, even if you're not cutting through wood, you want to make sure that there's oil getting on the chain. So that's going to tell you that the oiler is working properly in the chainsaw itself. If you go to buy a chainsaw and the chain is all beat up, it's all stretched, really, really loose, that can be a sign that the chainsaw has not been oiling properly. Now, that can be just from a dirty oiler hole that's plugged on the saw. However, it could be more serious. Like I said, it could be the oil pump. And if that's the case, you're going to need to do some oil pump repair, a new bar and chain. So right there, you could be up to $200 right off the bat. Also, guys, when you do start the saw, when you go to try it out, and always make sure you start up the saw before you buy it. You don't want to buy a chainsaw without starting it up. Stay away from that, especially from auctions where you can only bid on the chainsaw without physically seeing it and starting it. You just don't know what you're getting. I know a lot of people who bought chainsaws on online auctions, and when they brought them home, the piston and rings and cylinder were all scored up. So what you want to do when you start up the saw is hold it on its side, see how it runs on its side. If the crank seals are leaking, what's going to happen is the chainsaw won't run well on its side. Also, if the intake boot is cracked, it could do that as well. So these are just little tips. You might want to write these down on a piece of paper or bring somebody with you that knows what they're doing when it comes to chainsaws, because that will save you a lot of time and possibly a lot of money as well. Now, another thing you want to check on used chainsaws, especially older chainsaws, if they're equipped with it, is check the anti-vibe mount. So you can grab the chainsaw in your hands and just go like this. So this one here, this is an older chainsaw. It definitely needs the anti-vibe mounts fixed. This could be a saw here for parts or repair. It does run. And you want to also do it on the side. So it's going to tell you what's going on. Now, the anti-vibe mounts usually aren't that expensive, so it's not a deal breaker. If there's one or two mounts that are bad and the saw runs good and the rest is in good shape, it's probably worth buying. And also, if you are good at fixing chainsaws and you buy a used chainsaw that needs a bit of work, it's not a big deal. But if you don't know how to fix anything on a chainsaw, the cost is going to add up very, very quickly, because every time you take it to a shop, you're going to have a substantial cost right there just for the parts and the labor. And also with older chainsaws, when you go to buy them and you start them up, if you notice that the chain is turning at idle and the idle is set properly, that means you're going to need new clutch springs. I often see this with older chainsaws. It's just old age, wear and tear. So there are parts that will need to be replaced, kind of like the tires on your car. You know that at some point you're going to have to replace them. So the older the chainsaw is that you will buy, the more parts like that you will have to replace. Just parts that generally wear out before others. So when you go to buy a saw, just engage the brake and then try to move the chain forward. And if you can't move it, that means the brake works. You can also try the chain brake once you've started the chainsaw as well. Now, when I go to buy a used saw, what I usually do is flip it over like this. I have a look at the condition of the sprocket. And I do recommend that when you go to look at a used chainsaw to bring your spark plug tool like this and maybe the tools to take the muffler off. Now, if the owner lets you take the clutch cover off, that's awesome. Take it off, have a look at the sprocket. If you take the cover off and you end up seeing a sprocket that's worn out like this, then just make a note of that and basically add up the cost in your head to see if it'll be worth buying this saw, because that's going to be another cost right there, and possibly a new clutch bearing or the bearing that goes here in the sprocket drum. And another important thing you can do when you're looking at a chainsaw is check the fuel in the gas tank. Take the cap off. Now, as soon as you take the cap off, you're going to get a whiff of that gas. You're going to know if it's old or if it's fresh. If the gas is fresh and the saw runs good, then that's a good thing. If the saw won't start, the gas smells really old and varnicized, you're probably into some repairs, a lot of repairs maybe sometimes. You're basically going to need a carb kit, and in most times what I see is the fuel line needs to be replaced as well. And on older saws like this one, this is a Stihl 023. They're older model before the MS 230. So this saw here is probably 20 years old. When you buy a saw that's at least 20 years old, you're looking at a fuel line, carb kit, impulse line. Sometimes the intake boot might be cracked because it is a rubber part as well. And sometimes the crank seals as well may need to be replaced. So just keep in mind, 20-year-old saw that's got a lot of mileage on it, you're probably going to have to replace all the rubber parts in it. So I'm going to reiterate a few points that are a must-have and that can be a deal breaker, guys. When you go to buy a used chainsaw, make sure that it starts. I mean, you might be at some kind of event, maybe a flea market, or you're indoors at an auction. They may not be able to start it. So if you do buy a saw that you cannot start, guys, you are taking a big risk. You're gambling. Now, if you go to buy a saw, you're in a good setting, you're outside at the guy's home, and he doesn't want to start it, that's a huge red flag. Just basically walk away from that unless you're buying it for a part saw. The video I'm making here today, guys, is for people that are going to buy a chainsaw that is used and want to use it immediately. So if you want a saw that runs, guys, always make sure it starts. Always, 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 because people can be deceitful, they can hide some flaws. But again, the most important thing that you can check when you go to buy a used chainsaw is the condition of the piston rings and cylinder. That is the heart of the chainsaw. It's the most important thing to check. I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to make sure you guys know that when you go to buy a used chainsaw. And again, if you know the model of the saw you're going to look at and you know the tools required to take the muffler off, just bring them with you and see if the seller will allow you to take that muffler off and have a look. Because if the piston and rings are scored, basically just walk away, guys, unless you're going to get it for like next to nothing. So again, checking the internals of the motor by taking the muffler off is the most important thing. Down the line, second or third of most importance would be the aesthetics or the condition of the saw as a whole. If you see the saw is beat, let's say a landscaper had it or a logger, it's pretty well had the life sucked out of it. They've used it and made a lot of money with it. So it's got a lot of miles. So just keep that in mind that you will have to do repairs if you buy a chainsaw from somebody that used it professionally, because it's basically worn out. I don't recommend buying saws from loggers or landscapers unless they really looked after them. Now, another thing you could check as well is the saw leaking oil? It might be hard to know when you go to buy it, but you want to look around the chain area and the bar over here. Flip the saw over like this. Look underneath. If you see a big smear of oil dripping all over the place, it could be that it needs a new oil line, or that the case, or that the oil is leaking where the seam is on the case. And sometimes that can happen on the plastic saws as well. And also the pro saws like the 261 over here. They're a metal case, so sometimes the oil can leak in the seam. And I'll just show you here. So basically there's a seam that runs all along the metal part of the block. Sometimes oil can leak there. And basically if you did see oil leak from the seam or gas, the price of the saw would have to be reduced drastically, very, very drastically. And also what you can do, if the seller will allow you, is take the air filter cover off and look at the condition of everything. Sometimes saws are caked in with a lot of dirt all inside here. So if you see a lot of dirt in there, it shows you that the owner never really looked after it. And you may want to pop out the spark plug too if you want, if the seller will allow you. Sometimes you can look through the cylinder from the spark plug hole by using a flashlight. And if you see some scoring inside the cylinder, then just walk away. So always remember, guys, if you have the budget, buy a new saw. I always tell people that. However, if you're going to go look for a saw, the best thing I can recommend is to bring somebody with you. If you have a friend that's a mechanic, bring him with you. He's going to know exactly what to look for. And again, there's so many things to look for. But again, you have to expect, if you're buying a used chainsaw or any outdoor equipment that's used, just remember, it's not a new product. It's been used. You don't know how the previous owner used it. So at some point, you're going to have to do some kind of repair to it. And also, when you look at chainsaws, most chainsaws leak bar oil in one way, shape, or another. On a lot of steel chainsaws, sometimes it's just a matter of replacing the flip oil cap and then they don't leak anymore. If that's the case, then that's an easy solution. But if I've missed anything you should look for when buying a chainsaw, please comment below the video. Let me know what I forgot to mention in this video here. But I think I've covered most of what I would look for when I buy a chainsaw. And again, there could be hidden flaws or defects as well that you might miss when you go buy a chainsaw. But again, it works out well for a lot of people. They go look at a chainsaw and they're very happy. And what matters a lot that I find is how the previous owner looked after his stuff. If the guy is known for looking after his stuff and he's honest, you're probably going to end up getting a good deal and saving hundreds of dollars compared to buying a new saw. I do get customers that come in the shop here with saws they bought and it did not work out well, or it worked out well, but they had to spend a little bit more money than what they expected after buying the used chainsaw. So thanks again for watching, guys. Please like the video and share it, and make sure you're following me on social media. All the links are below the video, and you guys have a great day.